We're very stubborn, as all the French must be.
What if Brexit is a success and Britain prospers? Or can't you bear that idea?
Leaving the European country has a price to pay for.
Isn't your party getting desperate ahead of these elections next year?
It has nothing to do with next year's election. It really has to do with the principle of a deal that was signed.
Bitter dispute about fishing rights and a surge of migrants crossing from France to Britain have consigned Anglo-French relations to the deep freeze. Have both sides lost all sense of perspective? My guest this week from Paris is Bruno Bonnell, an MP for the ruling En Marche party. Is President Macron's tough foreign policy enough to woo right-wing voters before next year's presidential elections? Bruno Bonnell, welcome to Conflict Zone. Let's start, if we may, with the fishing dispute between France and the UK. Let's step back a moment. We have the only two nuclear powers in Europe, allies joined by countless numbers of projects sharing common values, and there is now a major diplomatic spat over fishing. Haven't you got better things to spend your time on?
Well, you could look at it as a minor issue, but in fact, it's a symbolic one. And that's why it becomes a political one. When the United Kingdom decided to go for the Brexit, we respected this choice. We didn't like it, but we respected it. And a deal was set. Especially in this deal, some obscure corners were cleaned with a specific contract. And the one regarding the fishermen was very important because we know that this dispute over the waters is a long dispute that happened far before EU, and it was important to clean it up.
I understand, but why have we got to the stage where there are threats of a trade war, threats to cut off or limit electricity supplies, gunboats facing each other? This has become a bit hysterical, hasn't it? I mean, listen to your junior Minister for European Affairs, Clement Beaune. Now we must speak the language of force because I fear that unfortunately this British government understands only this. A bit melodramatic, isn't it? You're not talking to Moscow, you're talking to London. You know, Moscow must be enjoying this enormously.
And we do talk to friends and allies with no issue. But the fact is that if you start breaking a piece of the contract between EU and UK, then what is going to happen with the other parts of the contract? For instance, the border in the Northern Ireland, all these issues. So the fact that after months and months, 10 months of negotiation, we couldn't find a deal where the French fishermen could have those licenses to fish in the UK waters, we had to come to a point where we had to put a stick in the ground. Now it reopened the negotiations, and as usual, like brothers, you fight hard. Then at the end of the day, you find a way to still love each other.
Yeah, but according to the president of the ports of Calais and Boulogne, he called this a drop in the ocean, said the row was ridiculous, and it was all about some 40 small boats, he said. 40 small boats.
Well,
licenses for them. People are going to look back in a few years' time, aren't they, and think you've all taken leave of your senses to get to this stage over the fate of licenses for 40 small boats.
It was 240 boats to start with.
And so he doesn't know what he's talking about. Huh?
I don't know, but what I can tell you is that those discussions were after this agreement, this non-agreement on 240 boats. So anyway, it's not a question of number of boats. It's a question of, as you said, after a couple of years, what are we going to look back at? Brexit is a big deal. Is it going to be good for UK or is it going to be good for EU? If we don't have this trade on a clean plate, on a clean agreement, that might be really problematic for the future. And that's what our government is trying to preserve.
Okay, but all this seems to stem from your government's insistence on telling the rest of Europe that leaving the Union, the European Union, must be a bad thing. What if Brexit is a success and Britain prospers? Or can't you bear that idea?
Well, we are convinced that all the big challenges of the future can only be analyzed through a continental lens, meaning that the US or the China, they are just so strong, so powerful that if we remain single countries with the big challenges of the future, space, ocean, probably protection from the migration, climate change, all these issues have to be at the continental level. So leaving the EU is not just the perception of a country making its own decision. It's the idea that this continent, this European continent, will be a little weaker to really face the challenges of the future, which means growth, employment, economy, ecology. So we believe that we are strongly European, and yes, leaving the European country has a price to pay for.
Yeah, but I come back to my question, what if Brexit is a success? You look at the recent note from your Prime Minister Jean Castex to the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. He said it's essential to make clear to European public opinion that leaving the Union is more damaging than remaining in it. Well, why is it so essential? Are you so afraid that other countries are going to start running for the exit as well as Britain?
Well, looking at the position of certain government in European Union, yeah, you may be concerned by the fact that people could be tempted by exiting EU. And again, we try to protect EU as much as we can. And talking about if Brexit is a success, I just can't wait for the next 10 years and see effectively if all those challenges I just mentioned can be just faced at a single country level, or if you need the power of Europe. Even look at the recent sanitary crisis that we faced. The agreement between all the European countries made it possible to really quickly find solutions that single countries by themselves couldn't find and didn't have the means to really invest in to make this crisis as smooth as possible, if I can say so.
You're talking about the pandemic. You're talking about COVID.
The pandemic, yes, the pandemic.
Well,
yes.
it was a very slow start in Europe, wasn't it? And each country went for its own interests. And Ursula von der Leyen pointed out at the beginning, this wasn't a satisfactory state of affairs by any means for the European Union. So I guess you learned as you went along. But it was every country for itself when the pandemic started, wasn't it? There wasn't much European unity on show then, was there?
Yeah, but you look after 18 months of this dramatic pandemic, it's really the strengths and coordination of Europe that really makes possible now to, for instance, protect most of the countries from a fifth wave, if any. And again, going solo in this situation was probably not the right way to go if you look at the numbers at the end of the day after 18 months.
Just going back to the fishing dispute, plenty of people in your country don't think much of the war or the threats that you made about banning UK trawlers from unloading in French ports. Jean-Marc Puissesseau, the president of the ports of Calais and Boulogne, who I mentioned earlier, he warned the French government against imposing sanctions on the UK. And he told the BBC it would be terrible for both sides of the channel, for you, for us, for the ports, for the fishermen in your country and in our country, and all that, just for a few little boats that aren't allowed to fish in your country. Did you really think that threatening Britain impressed your voters ahead of next year's elections? Was that your aim?
You know, frankly speaking, it has nothing to do with next year's election. It really has to do with the principle of a deal that was signed, a commitment taken by the UK that is not respected. And now talking about this man that you mentioned from the port of Calais, I understand his local issues for the local trade and the difficulty that the port may face. But when you talk about protecting EU, you have to swallow some pain, some time to really show that there are some much more important subjects than just your local issues. And I do.
You call them local
strongly
issues, but they're
that
jobs. You're talking about jobs at stake.
yes,
Jobs
yes.
in the
I
fish
talk.
and
I
seafood sector, jobs in Boulogne and Calais, which you're being warned are at risk or were at risk if you went
yeah.
ahead with your threats.
You're absolutely right. I talk about jobs. I talk about the jobs of the fishermen who are losing today between 25 and 30% of their business because of this non-agreement being signed. So jobs against jobs, at the end of the day, again, a contract has to be respected. And that's really the core of the discussion.
You didn't get as much support from the rest of the European Union as you'd hoped for, didn't you? Only 10 other EU states supported your so-called joint statement criticizing Britain. And they even watered down your text in the final version, didn't they? Removing references to an unsatisfactory and contradictory response by the UK. Are you surprised that you only got such lukewarm support from the rest of the EU?
Well, I'm not surprised because building something as complex as EU is a step-by-step process, and the fact that some countries are disagreeing on some topics seems to be like absolutely normal.
You've been at this a long
It was.
time. You've been trying to build this unity for a very long time.
Yeah, but we're very stubborn, as all the French must be, to really, if we believe in something, and we do believe in EU, we have to convince EU on every single topic to be strong together and to join forces, to gather their forces. If they decide to play solo, the UK decided with the Brexit, yeah, there will be some consequences, and the relationship between this territory, UK and EU, is now dramatically changed, and it will have impact on the economy, on social workers, on immigration. We'll see a list of impact by the mere fact that Brexit was decided and respected by the EU, but was decided by the people of the United Kingdom.
You've not only turned your anger against the British over this fishing dispute, you've started blaming.
No anger.
Well, it seemed like it. You started blaming the man who negotiated the Brexit deal for the EU, Michel Barnier. You seem to want to blame somebody for something here. The president of your party's parliamentary group in the National Assembly, Christophe Castaner, spelt it out on France Info, where he said those who negotiated the Brexit treaty told us, don't worry, everything's fine. Now we find there are instances of imprecision. If the UK can find a loophole in the text, it means it wasn't negotiated in the best way. I thought you were happy with what Michel Barnier did. President Macron heaped praise on him back in 2019. You've gone off him as well now, have you?
Well, there now we're talking about the French election, the coming one. Michel Barnier is one of the pretenders to go for the présidence de la République.
So you're just finding
normally
a stick
speaking,
to beat him with. You just want a stick to beat him with. Is that it?
Well, let's say that in this political world that I'm now facing every day, I've seen action that sometimes are more like almost like putting a little pointing fingers on the little details. But globally speaking, the Brexit negotiation went extremely well. We knew that we would have an issue with this fishing activity. We knew we will have probably an issue with the Northern Ireland border at one point in time. I don't know when. And effectively, UK shouldn't take advantage of the loophole of these discussions because globally speaking, everything was treated fairly.
All right, Monsieur Bonnell, the other big bone of contention between France and the UK are the illegal migrants crossing the Channel from the coast of France in ever-increasing numbers. In the second week of November, 1,200 people slipped through your security patrols and crossed the Channel in a single day. You're not being very effective at stopping them, are you? Perhaps you don't want to.
Well, come on. I mean, it takes two to tango here, right? 30,000 people tried to pass the Channel, and 40% of them succeeded. So if you look at the story from my side, we successfully stopped 60% of the people trying to pass the Channel. If you look at the other side of the Channel, on the UK border, right, there are some measures to be taken as well. So please, again, if we start playing with these numbers and the migrations to accelerate or intensify the tension on a very, very sensitive subject, I think that nobody is going to win. A win-win situation is to go on with agreement between the French authorities and the UK authorities to find a way out of this permanent migration. And by the way, a significant numbers of these migrants are actually coming from Belgium. And we're not blaming and pointing fingers
Well, I
at
was
Belgium.
going to say, they are seven out of 10 of them are supposed to be coming from Belgium. Why do you let them in if you know that a large number of them are going to transit illegally or try to transit illegally to the UK?
Because, well, the problem is that most of them are coming from Africa, as you know, through Spain or through Italy. As we are controlling the Spanish and the Italian border, they usually go through Germany and then move to Belgium, back to France, because their ultimate goal is the UK. I don't know why, but it seems that they feel more comfortable working or having activities in the UK. And that's why they put this pressure on those borders. We do our job, but again, we have to, it's a much more global issue. And this migration evolution, again, is one of those challenges I just mentioned that cannot be resolved only with a European coordination, and clearly a coordination with the UK authorities as well.
Well, perhaps you simply want to push the problem across to the British, knowing that since they left the EU, they no longer have the legal mechanism to send the migrants directly back to you. Is that the politics of
No,
this?
no, I don't think that's very fair to say so, because again, I'm telling you that 60% of the people trying to pass the channel were stopped by the European and French authorities. So it's just that there are so many people that it's very complex on such a large border, because we have to protect, as I said, Spain, Italy, and the channel. It's a very complex and a very heavy investment to face the number of people trying to make this happen. So no, there is no twisted way for France to get rid of the problem by shipping those people, human beings, to the UK without any concern about them. So no, it's not the French way of looking at this migration.
Well, you say that, but France's treatment of these migrants has come in for heavy criticism recently from human rights groups. Human Rights Watch reported last month that your officials regularly subject adults and children in migrant camps around Calais to what they called degrading and harsh treatment. Why do you do that?
But we don't do anything. Again, it's a question of numbers. We systematically trying to put to give to those people shelters. Today, the very day today, we closed a kind of camp built by people arriving from everywhere, and we closed this camp and we give shelters to every single individual. I think it's about 2,000 people who got protections. So it's easy, very easy for NGOs and human rights to point fingers again, but the total investment to protect those migrants is very significant on the French budget. Again, the migration wave is constant and growing. We can deny it, we can pretend that we need just to build walls and it will be enough, but climate change and economic crisis will push more and more people up north. So the question now is to coordinate and find a way to integrate or canalize all those people, and to be firm on the illegal one, and try to be as respectful as possible of the human being before they are sent back to their home countries.
You say that, but come to the attention of the French defender of rights, your ombudsman, who said even last year that your police tactics had left the migrants in a state of physical and mental exhaustion. So it's not just foreign NGOs that are reporting on this. Your own defender of rights is significantly worried by the treatment that these people are getting. Last year, police conducted 950 routine eviction operations in Calais. Nearly 5,000 tents, hundreds of blankets and sleeping bags were seized. These are basically items without which people, some of these people, and many of them are children, had to live in extreme hardship. I can't imagine that that's what you want or that's acceptable to you, is it? But that's what's going on.
No, of course it's not acceptable, and I can accept that there are some mishaps sometimes, but fundamentally against those numbers that you just mentioned, we have to look at the millions that are spent to give protection, shelters to especially the kids and the women, to make sure that they are not living in dramatic situation. And talking about what happens there, the NGO should look at the people taking advantage of their old despair there by selling blankets, selling tents, trying to take advantage of the misery of those people, where sometimes the police can be maybe blamed for some action, but most of the time they must be honored for what they do to protect the people.
Monsieur Badal, isn't the truth about this treatment of migrants that it's aimed at trying to take votes from the right-wing parties in the presidential elections next April? earlier this year, your interior minister made it clear that he didn't want the far right, Marine Le Pen, becoming president because, as he said, we've shown ourselves to be too naive and too soft. This is your big fear, isn't it? Being thought of too soft when you're facing a huge challenge from the far right parties that are concentrating on immigration as one of their illegal immigration as one of their major issues for next year's election.
You know, France is a country where the human rights were written. So I'm denying to anybody the right to say that France would just take advantage and hostage the migration for obscure political reason. The truth is that we do have in our country a significant number of parties on the extreme rights and on the right trying to push the idea that immigration is the key problem that we face, and without any immigration, we would solve all the economical and social issues in our country. We all know this is wrong. We know that immigration is a global wave, is something coming and growing for the coming years. So any reasonable political person has to face immigration with honesty and clearly prepare plans for the short, mid, and long term. Short term, yes, we have to protect and give shelters to those people, and we have to protect immediately some of our borders with some legal action. Midterm, we have to build some integration plan and see how we can deal with those people, explaining to them that no, coming north is not going to the paradise.
Mr. Badel, whatever you're doing, your party performed incredibly badly in local elections in the summer. You got just 7% of the vote, and you failed by a long way to win a single region on the French mainland. Aren't you getting desperate? Isn't your party getting desperate ahead of these elections next year? 2 months before that local election, a group of retired French generals wrote a hugely inflammatory note saying France was disintegrating in the face of Islamist radicalism and immigrant hordes. A poll showed that 60% of your electorate supported that view, including nearly half of those in your party. Big wake-up call for Emmanuel Macron, wasn't it? Big wake-up call.
Well, you know, we have wake-up call every day. The pandemic was a wake-up call. The climate crisis is a wake-up call. Politics is about wake-up calls, systematic wake-up calls.
60% of the electorate supported that view. 60% of the electorate supported that view that France was disintegrating in the face of Islamist radicalism.
Then I'm part of the 40%, because I believe too that we have a significant number of people coming from the immigration that help to build a better France. You have not only people who help to build, buildings or street or roads, but people who are in the medical business, in the legal business, in the engineering business. So no, I don't think that immigration is a huge problem for France. What is a problem is an uncontrolled immigration coming from desperate countries that may disappear with the climate crisis tomorrow. And as a political person, I think that, again, there is a need to invest in Africa. We spend and we expend our investment in Africa for this purpose, to really keep the people in their own country and to help them to rebuild their own economy. So that's the long-term answer to the migration crisis. All the rest, if we try to take those people as hostage for political game, I think it's just not at the level of the discussion we want to have in the future for our country.
Just very briefly on Emmanuel Macron's prospects for the next election. He was asked last year on Bastille Day why people hated him so much. And he didn't argue with the question. He admitted he'd failed to unite what he called a divided country, and said he understood the hate because, he said, we're a country which has that in its history, in its guts. If Macron is the target for so much hatred, why on earth should people vote for him again next year?
You know, I think that being a president in this very, very special time that we're living now, in transition time that we're living now, is probably very complex. But at the end of the day, we know we have a captain on board. We know we have someone who successfully invested in supporting the economy during the pandemic crisis. And we see the result right now. We have unemployment, diving. We have the economy rising at plus 7% this year. So effectively, which is a result of the quality of this captain. I think that at the end of the day, when people will go to vote for the French presidency, they look at the people and say, who is able to take the job and who is able to really face all those challenges? One of them has proven that was capable of doing it. And that would be your answer.
But you're worried. You have to be worried.
I'm not worried. I'm optimistic and paranoid because I think that you need both to be a good political leader and to make a campaign. So remain paranoid and optimistic.
Bruno Banal, it's been good to have you on Conflict Zone. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.